Greetings YouTube, Skill Incarnate bringing you all the latest indie gaming goodness. Welcome back as we look at another early access game. This time we're looking at a title called Fury Unleashed for the PlayStation 4 by Awesome Game Studios, the creators of yet another zombie defense. A very solid zombie survival game I hope to review in the future. Fury Unleashed is another roguelike platformer that takes inspiration from some of the more recent hardcore Metroidvania games, like Dead Cells and Blasphemous, along with some old school shooters like Contra and Metal Slug. However, what sets Fury Unleashed from the competition is the seamless mix of tight controls, a variety of unique settings, a massive number of over-the-top weapons, and a challenging but rewarding roguelike difficulty. Let's take a look at Fury Unleashed. The story of Fury Unleashed takes place within the pages of the Fury Unleashed comic book. John Kowalski, the comic's creator, has lost hope in his creation, and is considering ending the series. The player takes control of Fury, the hero of the comic, and a one-man army, as they battle their way through 4 chapters represented as issues in the Fury Unleashed comic series. Each chapter has their own enemies, hazards, and bosses. The first chapter takes place in the jungle, with the player fighting undead monsters and carnivorous plants. The second chapter has you travelling back in time to fight the Third Reich, who are attempting to use stolen future technology to rule the world. The third chapter has you attempting to stop an alien invasion by invading their mothership before it reaches Earth. And the final chapter takes place in the author's own sketchbook, infested by monsters representing the author's doubts and fears. You need to destroy all of these in order to restore the author's faith in his creation, and inspire him to continue illustrating Fury's adventures. The story isn't going to win any awards, but it's a deliberate choice on the developer's part to emulate the classic 80s action comic books that the game is inspired from. The gameplay of Fury Unleashed is a gauntlet of platforming and frantic bullet hell style combat, with the player fighting their way through a series of comic book panels to get to the end of the chapter. Each panel is procedurally generated, with enemies and hazards unique to the current location. There are a variety of enemies in the game that individually aren't much of a threat, but they can fill the screen with projectiles and quickly deplete the health of careless players when they're in larger groups. Some enemies can also hide in the background, waiting for unsuspecting players to approach. Every panel also has the chance of containing one of the game's many mini-bosses, dangerous foes lurking in areas laced with hazards and dangers, whom the player can defeat for rare weapons and items. Successfully defeating enemies and bosses will reward you with ink, which is the currency of the game. Black ink can be used to purchase permanent upgrades for your character, which carry over to subsequent runs. And gold ink can be used to purchase weapons and upgrades to help you in your current run. If you're lucky enough to make it to the end of a chapter, you will face one of the game's bosses. There are 3 bosses in every chapter, and you'll need to defeat all 3 in order to unlock the next area of the comic. The bosses are the highlight of the game for me, as they tower over the player, filling the screen, and will take all but the most skilled players several attempts to defeat. A central aspect to the game is the combo system, which you'll need to master, as this is the only way to recover health in Fury Unleashed. When you eliminate 5 enemies in quick succession, you will start a combo. Every additional enemy you kill now has a chance to drop red ink, which will heal the player for a small amount. However, if you are hit, then your combo will end, along with your chance to gather more health. There's also an upgrade granting you up to 3 disposable one-hit shields. You'll get a shield for every 5 kills you make, and this makes combos even more useful in order to preserve your precious health. This system adds an extra layer of difficulty, as well as an element of urgency to the game, pushing the player to move quickly through each level, to keep their killing streak running. Luckily, Fury is a very agile hero, and can use double jumps and air dashes in order to avoid enemy fire. Skilled players can use these evasive moves and their combo shield in order to completely avoid damage, and you'll need to pull this off in order to make it to the end of the chapter with enough health to stand a chance against the final boss. Fury Unleashed also contains RPG elements, with the player being able to spend ink gathered through subsequent runs to purchase items for your skill tree. As with most RPGs, not all upgrades are created equal, so smart players will focus on upgrades that increase your combo length and provide additional combo shields. The concept of the comic book seeps its way into every element of Fury Unleashed, from the way you move between comic book panels, to the use of speech bubbles and captions. Weapon schematics can be found by completing challenges as you move through the comic, and presented to the Ink Master, who can draw them into existence for you to use. The art style also complements this comic book feel, with the player and environments brought to life in colourful detail. The developer went wild with the characters and settings, with jungles full of spinning blades and man-eating plants, underground bases full of Nazis controlling futuristic robots, and a gigantic alien mothership with laser-wielding alien soldiers. The player can also unlock dozens of unique models for Fury, with some of them influenced by the enemies you will find in the game, and others influenced by popular pop culture icons. I loved the design of the weapons, which were suitably over the top. From saw blade launchers to nail guns and black hole generators, you'll always find something to murder your enemies with. The 80s action movie feel of the comic is complemented by the pumping rock soundtrack, which will become more intense the larger your combo grows. So, do I recommend Fury Unleashed? Well, I think you already know the answer. This is not a groundbreakingly original game, but it's one of the best roguelike platformers I've ever played. The campaign, while short, has the player exploring 4 unique comics, each with their own enemies and settings. The controls are tight and responsive. The art style is colourful and suits the comic book style to perfection, and the mini-bosses and level bosses are suitably epic, with projectiles filling the entire screen, and many attempts required to learn their patterns and defeat them. The game also has massive replay value for completionists, as it will take many runs to unlock all of the abilities in the skill tree, along with all of the weapon schematics and player models. I feel the biggest strength of the game is in the difficulty. Many roguelike games are inaccessible to new players. However, Fury Unleashed has 4 difficulty modes, catering to players of all skill levels. If this isn't enough to convince you, there's also 2-player local co-op, available for console players, which in my opinion is the absolute best way to enjoy the game. I had a literal blast shooting my way through the game with my trusty sidekick Mr. Bobbles. Fury Unleashed is available on PlayStation and Steam for $30. But I recommend picking it up on PlayStation because it's best experienced using a controller. Plus, for some reason, the Steam version doesn't have local co-op yet. And that was it for my review of Fury Unleashed. As always, I hope you enjoyed watching this review, and I would love to hear from fellow gamers who have also finished the game, especially if you managed to finish on the highest difficulty, because I'm still struggling with that myself. Hopefully you'll join me next time when we look at another indie game. Until then, Skill Incarnate, out.